And then I have to wait for it to process and get over its delay. Hi, everyone. We're going to be going live in just a few minutes, so sit tight, and we will start our Pebble Mine panel at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so just FYI to my panelists, I'm going to start with the grid view. And then once I do the introductions, so you'll all be visible. And then after I do the introductions, we will switch to speaker view. So it'll be one-on-one, one person at a time when you're speaking, okay? All right, if you're just joining us, we're going to be going live in just a couple of minutes with our Pebble Mine panel with National Fisherman's Expo Online.
Hey, Jess, is the YouTube link end in VY7? Oh, I think you're on mute. What's that? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you.
We are also live on this NF page that I'm sending you to. Okay, we're going to start in just about 1 minute. If you're watching, we'll go live with National Fisherman's Expo Online Pebble Mine panel at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Okay, everybody ready? Hi, everyone, and welcome to Expo Online, your digital portal for Pacific Marine Expo on nationalfisherman.com. I'm your host, Jessica Hathaway, editor-in-chief of National Fisherman magazine. As part of our ongoing conference and education series, today I'm sitting down with advocates for Alaska's Bristol Bay region salmon fisheries and coastal communities to discuss the prospects for Pebble Mine. Joining me today are panelists Katherine Carscallen, Executive Director of Commercial Fisherman for Bristol Bay, Andy Wink, Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development Association, and Lindsay Layland, Deputy Director of the United Tribes of Bristol Bay. We are live here on November 19th, 2020. And this week we saw that Pebble Corp submitted its mitigation plan to satisfy the U.S. Army Corps' requirements based on feedback that the plan was not acceptable for permitting because it did not adequately address the risks to local habitat. There are some, and I'm putting this out to my panel, including Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan, who have asserted that the permit is dead, but it still seems to be very much in play. So I'd like to go to each panel member and ask you where we are at this moment in the process.
So thanks so much, Jess, for that introduction. I'll start again by saying my name is Lindsay. Thanks to this panel for sharing this space and for National Fisherman for hosting. As Jess said, I'm the Deputy Director at United Tribes of Bristol Bay, which represents 15 tribal governments and over 80% of the in-region population in the Bristol Bay area. So super grateful to be able to represent those voices and share some of our thoughts today. And I'll just start by saying, kind of just echoing that sentiment that where we are today is nowhere near being done with this process of permanently securing protections for the Bristol Bay region from unsustainable developments like the Pebble project. We have a long ways to go. We've come a very long ways, and I know we're going to talk more about it, but to very simply address that, is the Pebble Mine dead again? No, it's not, and we're going to keep working toward that, and I know we'll share some more conversation about that here in the next hour or so as we get into the details. But at a 10,000 foot level, lots of work yet to be done. That's why it's so important for all the voices here to continue to listen in, tune in, weigh in, provide comment, and of course we'll talk about that as we get going here. But thanks again for having us.
Thanks, Lindsay. Katherine, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, just to boil down to a little more specific, and thanks again, my name is Katherine Carscallen with Commercial Fisherman for Bristol Bay, and really appreciate this platform and just going live is always, there's challenges with that, but thank you so much for providing this opportunity, because really things have been happening, changing by the minute and advancing with this project. So as you mentioned, this Monday, Pebble submitted their compensatory mitigation plan as required by Army Corps of Engineers. And although we haven't seen it as the public, it just went straight from the Pebble Limited Partnership to the Army Corps of Engineers. Based on the environmental impact statement that was already finalized, we honestly don't even have to see this draft of a compensatory mitigation to know that there is no way it will be adequate to protect Bristol Bay. And so any continuation, I mean, just like Lindsay said, the project won't be dead as long as we don't have protections for Bristol Bay. And the fact that we are almost to the end of a very fast track permitting process and nearing the end of a record of decision on Pebble's permit means Pebble's more than just not dead. It's happening right now. And at any minute now, we could see a record of decision.
So can someone fill me in on when that time frame expires? I know it was extended with the mitigation plan.
So I'll take a stab, and Andy and Kat, feel free to jump in too, but there's actually not a new deadline or a new timeline for the Army Corps to respond and to issue what is called the ROD, or the Record of Decision. The Pebble Limited Partnership did face a deadline, which I think was Wednesday, Kat. It was yesterday, November 18th. They did need to submit their compensatory mitigation plan to the Army Corps of Engineers by yesterday, which of course they submitted it on Monday, so they made it in. But now there's not really a specific time that the Army Corps has to respond. So they could review the compensatory mitigation plan. They so far have refused to allow the public to see it. As Katherine mentioned, they refused to provide public comment period on it, for folks to weigh in, which is very concerning, as we saw and Kat mentioned with the final EIS and the entire permitting process as a whole. So the fact that we aren't able to review that document and see for ourselves what it says and trust the Army Corps to to accurately assess it is pretty concerning based on the permitting process we've observed so far. But that being said, they could issue a record of decision by January 21st. They could do it before then. They could do it after then. They could push it down the road for a while. There's really not a set timeline in which they have to respond.
Okay, so given that we are looking at the end of the year and the end of the Trump administration, we're now looking at an incoming Biden administration beginning in January. And it was an Obama-Biden administration that initially granted the Clean Water Act protections for Bristol Bay in 2014, which was seen as a preemptive veto because the permitting process hadn't begun. And so a lot of proponents of Pebble Mine advocated to allow the process to go through and not preemptively veto with Clean Water Act protections of 404, is it 404.3? 404c3. So that led to a lawsuit that eventually kicked this can far enough down the road to be reopened by the Trump administration incoming in 2016. And Biden pledged in August to block the mine's development if elected. So what are you hearing? Have you been in touch with the incoming administration and representatives and members of Congress who have supported the fight against Pebble?
Yeah, I can jump in here, and then others have more to say. But you're right. Just when Joe Biden was about two months ago, I think, then presidential hopeful, Joe Biden stated that he would, if elected president, he would carry on the Obama era protections and protect Bristol Bay through the 404 process. And just a quick review: the Clean Water Act does give authority to EPA to enact a 404C process, so to initiate the process, and that essentially gives them the authority to withdraw waters of the U.S. from certain discharges, and mine waste is one of the major discharges that they can withdraw or prohibit from being placed into waters of the U.S. if it finds that those discharges would have significant impacts on a fisheries resource. So that's the 404C veto authority that we're looking for EPA to do. And yeah, absolutely. This could have been done in this administration, and it's something we've asked for consistently. And I think it's just worth noting that even in this administration, where Army Corps has clearly fast-tracked the permit, one of their key findings and statements in their letter to Pebble when they asked for compensatory mitigation was that they found that Pebble, as proposed, would have adverse impacts on Bristol Bay's waterways and fisheries. So that's the trigger in the Clean Water Act that allows EPA to act. So I think that, personally, I'm very hopeful that with this new administration, they would be able to pick up where the Obama administration left off, and this time actually be able to build from Army Corps' own findings on Pebble's actual permit.
Yeah, and I think even a lot of us stakeholder groups have been very involved in reaching out and stating our displeasure with the lack of a rigorous permitting process here to the Alaska senators Murkowski and Sullivan. We've heard from Senator Murkowski that this permitting process has not met a very high bar, and actually Senator Sullivan, in addressing UFA a few weeks back, we asked him about, why are you saying that the Pebble project is dead? And, one of the things that he said was that if the Corps doesn't do their job, then the EPA should exercise its 404C veto. And he noted that he sits on one of the oversight committees for the EPA. And so again, I think with Congress, you've got to let government agencies like the Army Corps and EPA do its job, but when we don't feel that they are doing them, that's where Congress has an oversight role. And I think, that's where our conversations have been directed towards is, hey, this situation needs oversight. So, we'll see how the new Biden administration shakes out. But this seems to be shaping up to be something that we've got Republican senators in Alaska that believe this is the wrong mine in the wrong place, and that this process just has not been very robust. And certainly under the Obama administration and what we've heard from Biden and the Democrats is that they also believe that. So maybe this is something that can find bipartisan support. I think we'd all appreciate that in this moment in time.
Right, Andy, you raise a really good point that, you know, the permit has been roundly criticized by government agencies, by EPA, even by Army Corps, and absolutely by people in fisheries management and scientists and anyone with a degree that has gotten their hands on this report, as far as I have seen so far. So, you know, I think that raises a really good question about allowing the process to go forward. You know, we have seen the process go forward, and we've seen it go forward as a deeply flawed process and permit. So, you know, Kat, I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit about, you know, what happens if the permit is granted, what the next step might be for EPA.
Yeah, so if Army Corps chooses to grant the permit, and so when we're talking about a record of decision, that's the Army Corps' decision on the permit. So that would be where they have the option to either grant the permit, deny the permit, and then either one of those come with, there's different types of denials that could happen. But if Army Corps chooses to grant the permit, that's one of the instances where EPA has this veto authority, and they could step in and veto that permit. And just for clarity, they can truly do that right now. We are in the process. So the term veto authority is a little bit of a misnomer because it implies that a permit would have to be granted to be vetoed. That's not actually the case. We're actually in the window where it's more of a negotiation process between EPA and Army Corps. And if there are disagreements on a permit, but a permit issuance from Army Corps would absolutely, in our view, be a disagreement because of the comments that EPA has already made on the environmental impact statement, and consistently asked Army Corps to improve their environmental impact statement, to ask more from the company, and those recommendations have been consistently ignored through this process. So that's where EPA could step in, initiate a 404C process, and start the ball rolling on Clean Water Act protections.
And some of those requests have included, Lindsay, I don't know, can you speak to some of the pieces of the permit that were glaring omissions?
Well, yeah, how much time do we have, really? Because there's too much. I mean, these are the things that we've been saying for years, and Pebble has still never followed up on them. They've never released or included an economic feasibility study. They still haven't proved that this mine is going to make any money, and I'm laughing because it's kind of a joke, right? Like, I mean, they haven't proved that they're going to make money on this project, and that's a slap in the face to the people of Bristol Bay and the people of Alaska. And the United States, who they claim this is going to be a great benefit for. They haven't included a massive tailings dam failure, which we have seen time and time again in major mines like this with man-made earthen dams across the planet. Most recently in memory, right, was Mount Polley in BC. I mean, they are just these huge elements of what should be a substantial permit application for a mine of this size and scope that they are not including in the application process. And Andy, it looks like you have something to add there too. There's too much to count, but I know these guys can back me up.
Well, I don't want to take you off track, but you're right. I mean, and we actually commissioned a study about tailings dam failures, and had a very objective analysis that looked at tailings dam failures around the world, with the size of the mine, the slope of the downstream topography, and had it very well modeled and very well done. And we submitted that to the Army Corps during the comment period, and it was a kind of radio silence on that. I mean, we essentially did their work for them that they should have done, and they just ignored it. One of the key things we've been asking for. But yeah, to your point, how much time do we have? There's so many problems with this. One of which is the compensatory mitigation, but I think it would be wrong to say that, be very wrong to assume that that's the only problem left in this process. Far from it. The other ones have just been skipped over. Did you have any other ones you wanted to kind of highlight?
Well, I just wanted to add, I wanted to go back to what Katherine had said right before this, just to summarize and again to emphasize that, as you mentioned, Jess, a lot of pushback has been that the EPA was putting forward a preemptive veto. They were going to stop this project before they even submitted a permit, a permit application. Well, we're there. They've submitted a permit application. The Department of the Interior, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, agencies of the state of Alaska, the Environmental Protection Agency have all weighed in and said, you didn't do a good enough job. This project is going to have adverse impacts, irreversible adverse impacts forever. Now is the time to issue a 404C veto. It has never been more appropriate than right now. And they can still do it if a permit is issued. They can still make that action, but this is the perfect time for the EPA to step in and say, it's not preemptive, it's not retroactive, it's right now, we can do it.
Yeah, you guys are right. There's a million things that are wrong with this permit application, but I'll just underscore Lindsay's point that they were not required to back their plan up with an economic feasibility statement. It's not that we don't think there's money here. It's not that the deposit isn't worth billions. It's that development of the deposit in an ecologically sound way is not possible, and it's definitely not economically feasible. And that's the major problem, is they have never been required to prove that the plan they're putting forward is what the full development of the mine would actually look like. And as we've seen through the Pebble tapes, which I think we'll probably get into, it's a complete lie of a plan, and cleanup is what's not economically feasible. They've got a plan that will make them money if they can take the ore out and basically walk away, which is all we can expect at this point from what we've seen in this company and their track record.
Right. Yes, we will get into the Pebble tapes. Don't worry. But my next question is, we just talked about sort of what happens if the permit is granted, but what happens if it's denied? What's the next step? How feasible, I guess, is the project? To how likely is it to go forward if the permit is denied?
Well, what's likely to happen, the first thing that's likely to happen is if the permit is denied, the Pebble Partnership will likely sue and try to pursue what they think is the right way to get it reversed or to apply again or whatever it might happen. But that's actually not even kind of the major piece of all this, is that a permit denial, while it might deny Pebble's current application, it doesn't do anything to prevent someone else or a new company from coming in and getting the rights to that mineral deposit and developing the Pebble deposit. So a permit denial might be a short-term temporary stock crash for Pebble, possibly, but it doesn't close the door. It doesn't protect Bristol Bay forever, which is really what we're looking for. And I'll turn it over to Kat, because she and I have talked so much about this in other conversations about next steps beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think even a permit denial for this company doesn't mean the end for this company, because there are different ways it could be denied. It could be denied just on a simple technicality where the company could just come back and really, because the plan that they've put forward, the permit they've put forward, is such a sham of a permit. It's a lie. It's not what their true plans are. A denial is almost equally irrelevant, because what they've consistently done is waited for the political landscape to line up in their favor as much as they want. And so if this permit is denied, they'll just lay back and wait until there's another time to put in another permit. But Lindsay's right. We can't rest. I mean, as we've all asked Army Corps to deny this permit, obviously, because that's the process. And of course we would celebrate, but it's a celebration for a day, really, and then it's straight back to work to try to get long-term protections. And those long-term protections are spelled out in the Clean Water Act. And EPA is really the agency with the authority to do that. Army Corps is the agency to permit projects, to grant or deny them, but they are not the agency designed to protect resources, to protect waters of the US. That's the Environmental Protection Agency.
Right, Army Corps is there to determine the feasibility of the permit application. So, Katherine, you've been talking about, this being a sham of an application and that it doesn't really cover the full scope of what the plan seems likely to be. And that can sort of lead us into the Pebble tapes. I want to talk about how the landscape of this battlefield has changed with the release of the Pebble tapes, and what that means for your organizations and what you've done with that information and the feedback that you're getting based on that release.
Well, I'll again kick it off just because, the Pebble tapes, as shocking as they were, they revealed everything that we have known for years. They revealed that they are going to work toward a mega mine, a huge, massive, long-term, years long, decades long project when they've been touting this smaller 20-year mine plan, when all along they have been anticipating this to be something multiples of that size, and an 80-year mine plan and beyond. So really what the Pebble tapes did was just revealed to the public what we have known to be true, and revealed to our elected leaders what we've known to be true, and that what the kind of behind the scenes conversations have been about senators staying quiet in their corners and not actually taking action or doing anything, and the close relationship between Governor Dunleavy and the Pebble Partnership. Kind of really exposed all those corrupt elements of this process so far, which was incredibly disheartening, but not at all surprising for us to see. One thing too that I'll mention with the Pebble tapes is that we saw in the fallout was that Tom Collier resigned, the CEO of the Pebble Limited Partnership resigned, but that did nothing to address the top leadership corruption and issues within the Northern Dynasty Minerals Company and within the Pebble Partnership. They brought back on John Shively, who has been someone who's been a long time worker with that group, and they didn't do anything to address the corruption that's embedded within those companies as a whole. And so while they got rid of one spokesperson for their group, they really didn't change their ways. They didn't change their stride. They didn't fix their problems. So those are just two pieces worth addressing, but I'll hand it over to Andy and Katherine too, because there was so much content in the Pebble tapes that we could talk for hours.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Lindsay, about it. It just really sort of proved out a lot of things that who have been in this process for a while and been tracking this closely, have known, either known and or suspected. And I think the other interesting thing is that, there was a lot of very shocking issues discussed in those tapes, including expecting the state of Alaska to pony up, $1.5 billion, creating shell companies to hold all the assets and another one to hold all the risk, and on and on. And, all of these very concerning things as it pertains to a permitting process and a mine plan. They got rid of their president with Collier, but they didn't address any of the underlying, issues here. It's like, I guess it's all true, obviously, if they don't have any evidence to say otherwise. I think it just, what the tapes really did was really lay all that bare for the public. And, for those of us who are in the opposition on this, who oppose Pebble, I think now's the time to make our voices heard, because, the curtain has been pulled back. And I think that everyone hopefully can galvanize, our political leaders can galvanize around creating a long-term solution, so that we're not constantly dealing with this hanging threat over the fishery and over the region.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is in my rewatch of the tapes, I tried to watch it just remembering the context of this is the mining company executives really bragging their project up and trying to sell their project to what they thought were prospective investors. So when they're talking about their mine plan and really the way they blatantly brag about how they've gamed the permitting system here. I took that all at face value, because like Lindsay said, it's exactly what we've been complaining about and seeing and experiencing for the last 2 years through this permitting process. And then when they talk about their political influence, I hope that some of that really is bragging. And that's where, when you ask about how that's changed the landscape following the release of the tapes, I think it gives our elected officials the opportunity to either prove Pebble wrong or prove them right. And I think that's what we've seen. The timing of the tapes that came out right in the middle of a really big Senate race in Alaska, obviously, and both our senators have since clarified their positions on Pebble. And the part, I think Tom Collier says, our senators are just over there sitting in the corner, and that that really helps us, basically, that, you know, they're sitting quietly and doing nothing. From their perspective, I think in the bragging way, they're implying that our senators are on their side. I would hope that's not the case, but the fact remains that as long as no action is taken, that is helping the company. So that's really where we've tried to push that and have those conversations with our senators. And I think it has to be ongoing, that lack of action is really helping the company in this process, especially seeing how much of what we've been concerned about is true behind the scenes.
Right, and the fallout in terms of Collier, I mean, Collier, based on what the tapes were saying, was essentially brought on to shepherd the company through the permitting process. He had close ties with Army Corps and understood the permitting process through the Donlin mine permit process that, you know, again, according to the tapes he had worked on. So his loss, you know, the company's loss of Tom Collier is not necessarily a hindrance to them at this point, since their permitting process, at least in this phase, is through. But I wanted to give you a moment. I know that there have been some recent comments from Sullivan and Lisa Murkowski, Senator Murkowski, about the mine, clarifying their points. Andy let us off with, you know, with Sullivan's comments. Does someone want to speak to any news that you're getting from Murkowski or Don Young, the Alaska rep?
I'll actually invite Katherine to kick this off because and I can follow up. She and I have talked about this one as well too, and how we can best answer this question. But Kat, I mean, just in terms of, you know, we saw Murkowski's report language earlier this week, and what that means and what that doesn't mean, you know, moving forward. Those are conversations we've been having, if you want to take a first stab at it.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, just immediately following the tapes coming out and in some of her public addresses, like before the Alaska Federation of Natives, Murkowski clarified, or basically came to the decision that this, you know, Pebble really cannot be permitted, and it's the wrong mine in the wrong place. And then it's like we've been talking about, it's the action that comes from that really will determine where we land on this. And I think both Senator Sullivan and Murkowski are supportive and have been basically pushing for a permit denial, or you know, supportive of Army Corps taking that route. And that's where, as we've already explained, that's not a final answer for us. So Murkowski's appropriations language, so she did this last year, and again this year, she basically put language in the spending plan for the coming year, signaling to Army Corps that they need to uphold the rigorous process that we expect of them, and really set the bar high. And so she repeated that language, and I think that was before this compensatory mitigation was submitted. And I mean, essentially our read on that was just like a warning to Army Corps not to delay the process, not to, you know, get this done within 90 days and come to a decision. So I think in that respect, she's definitely, you know, she's always been very process oriented and doesn't want to go outside of the regular process. And that's where our message is just consistent with her, that the process for Pebble has played out. Like, they were given the chance, they were given, you know, really every leg up in this process from the Army Corps to prove that they can do this. And even Army Corps has concluded that they can't. So, you know, the next step in the process would be EPA intervention. And that's where both senators have stated that if Army Corps doesn't do their job, basically doesn't deny the permit, that EPA should act and use their 404C Clean Water Act authority. So it's a little bit of semantics, I think, that we believe it should happen right now, and EPA is in clear authority to do so. Whether or not we allow it to play out a little further and come to Army Corps record of decision, to me, that's more of a political question than actual process question. I don't know if I'm confusing things, Lindsay or Andy, if you have anything to add.
No,
Yeah.
I think I'd just sum up what I think you guys are trying to say, which is the senators have been very pro-process on this, and I think they'd like to see the process sort of continue and quickly conclude before any sort of, you know, veto action is taken. But, you know, we certainly are within that window where I think the EPA has plenty of information to make a decision regarding a 404C veto. But for the senators' part, it seems like they they believe that this is the wrong mine, the wrong place, that this mine plan doesn't meet a high bar. And, you know, as Senator Sullivan said, if they did somehow get a permit, that he would push the EPA to veto it. So I think that's kind of where we're at. You know, it seems like the senators want to see this process conclude, rather than be sort of, you know, cut off by a veto or sort of drift into the Biden administration perhaps. But you know, I guess the ball is squarely in the Army Corps' court. We'll just have to wait to see what they do.
Yeah, and I'll just cap that off, Jess, by saying that as both Andy and Catherine have mentioned, both of our senators have now said the right thing. They have both said wrong mine, wrong place. They have said permanent protections for Bristol Bay are what's needed. They have said 404 EPA should enact 404C if it comes to that. Now it's time to act. It's time to walk their walk. It's time to prove what they're saying to be true. And the way to do that is to communicate with the people of the Bristol Bay region, to sit down with leadership, to have conversations about a Bristol Bay based long-term approach for protections for the region. That strategy is really the only way forward. So it's basically just time for them to start acting.
Great, thanks everyone. So I guess, you know, this isn't a fisheries specific comment, but this whole process, following it for, you know, more than a decade and being in touch with all the stakeholders that have been working so hard to represent their coastal communities in this fight, it helps me understand better what the chances of fighting a mine like this would be for a community that had less of a hook. I mean, you guys have, you know, the most productive salmon streams in North America, but what if your community doesn't have that? It just brings to mind the power that we give to resource extraction in this country. And it's not just Alaska. I mean, Alaska certainly has a good relationship with resource extraction, but it's eye-opening, the entire process, to see just how powerful and how easily these powerful companies navigate the system to their advantage and to the disadvantage of the communities that they're entering. So that's my little aside. Sorry, Lindsay, did you want to say something?
No, that's good. I mean, even if we took salmon out of the equation, this doesn't mean that thousands of years of indigenous communities aren't going to be adversely affected and their cultures aren't going to be totally ripped to shreds because of this. You know, I mean, the Tongass National Forest isn't the greatest salmon producer in the world, but there are, you know, overreach happening in a way that's going to adversely impact indigenous communities whose voices are being squashed. And the same thing's happening up north in Anwar. So what we're seeing is, you know, this tradition, this culture of colonialism, I guess, and I know we're getting away from fish a little bit here, but it's all so related that like the only reason to stand up for Pebble isn't because of the fish, right? There's so much more than that. Fish is just an easy central way for us all to get together on. But yeah, it's tragically disheartening, and all I know for sure that does give me some encouragement is that the people on this panel and the folks that are listening are just going to keep fighting forever and ever. And that's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen any of you slow down, so it's been a long time already. And I agree, Lindsay, the fish are not the only reason, but I have to wonder, I just personally wonder how far this process would have gotten if it weren't for the wild salmon productivity in the area.
Yeah,
of course, that's
go ahead. I just wanted to add a little bit onto that. I mean, you're absolutely right that I mean, here we have the most valuable salmon fishery in the world. Employs probably more than 15 jobs for every one that the mine would, and you know, I think employs people from just about every state that come up to fish there, as well as sport fishing and subsistence. And yet, even in the face of all that, we have a foreign mining company that is, you know, a pen stroke away from getting a permit. I mean, if the process can't work here, boy, it seems like it would be very difficult for other situations where you're talking about the main concerns maybe being resident health downstream, which is a huge concern that should be, really valued in these processes. But it just doesn't always appear that that's the case. And even in Pebble, the compensatory mitigation plan, I mean, it's talking about mitigating land within the upriver area, but nothing downstream, because it assumes, well, this dam won't fail within 20 years. So, there's no worries. But, if it does, there's no way to mitigate damage on that scale, or to mitigate the pristine, the degradation of pristine habitat upriver. So yeah, I think you make a good point, Jess. It's it's very disheartening to see the fight be this difficult in this situation where it seems like such a no-brainer. Disheartening.
Yeah, I guess the worries depend on which side of the tailings dam you're on. So I want to move on a little bit to, resources that you would recommend for anyone viewing here, and how your organizations are working with the public, and what Fisherman can do next, because we're not, as Lindsay was saying when we were chatting about this earlier, we're not in a public comment period right now. So, people watching this are saying this is all good information, or maybe not, maybe they're saying you guys are awful. But anyway, they want to know what to do next. So what are the next steps, and how are you facilitating that through your organizations?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly, and I think I'll just underscore the fact that we are even fighting this, and that we've been fighting this for 10, 20 years now, that we've been facing this threat. Really, I mean, to me, it speaks to the flaws in the process, that the permitting process and is not equipped to deal with a situation like this. For the very fact that we're at the 11th hour of a potential permit for Pebble means that something's broken in this process. And that's why, as much as everything we've said leads to EPA has full authority to act, they should act. The fact that they haven't already is why we really need leadership in this. And that's the number one thing that we can all do is just continue to hold our elected leadership accountable to help keep these processes accountable, and do, like Andy said, do an audit of what's been going on, and encourage EPA to do their job, and keep pushing. And if that truly doesn't work, then there needs to be another avenue. If there's a legislative approach that could permanently protect Bristol Bay, like Lindsay said, working with stakeholders, working with local residents and fishermen to come up with something. But it really is time for we elect leadership for this very reason, to stand up for people, watersheds, jobs, economies. So that's number one, is just, a simple phone call. Even I think now is the time, to your senators, and then to this incoming administration, just to make sure that this remains a priority.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that too. Just as Katherine said, although we're not in a public comment period, all fishermen, all Alaskans, all people across the United States who consume wild salmon or care about Bristol Bay, call your senators, call your elected officials. Like, if this does come to legislative action, they're going to need all of the public support that they can get to push for long-term protections. And then, and this is kind of a canned statement, but it's still true after all these years, is the organizations on the ground are the ones who are really leading this fight. And so check out our websites, go to utbb.org, check out our Facebook page, Commercial Fisherman for Bristol Bay, the BBRSDA. We all have continuous updates about what's going on with this fight that we're happy to provide and keep people in the loop on. And I'll do a totally shameless plug here in the spirit of, Fish Expo, which unfortunately we can't meet this year, but at 4 p.m. Alaska time today, 5 p.m. Pacific, there's going to be a virtual happy hour that you all can register for, to get more of this conversation and to help raise money for the people on the ground who are putting forward this tireless fight. And that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take resources and support and money and voices. And that is what has led us to success so far, and will really help us get pushed over the edge. But yeah, it's just people continuing to call on their elected officials, public comment period or not. Push them, call them, write them, tell them we need long-term protections for the Bristol Bay region.
Yeah, and I want to kind of narrowcast, I guess, to the commercial fishermen of Bristol Bay. BBRSDA, we represent the commercial fishery, and there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of consumers in the U.S. and around the world that that consume the fish from this fishery. And we, like I said, we have fishermen. A lot of our fishermen are from Alaska or Washington State, but we, I believe, have permit holders or crew members from around like 47 states. And it's really important that Alaskans tell their representatives why this issue is important to them and what Bristol Bay means to them. But I would also say, if you live in another state outside of Alaska or Washington, make sure you reach out to your representatives, no matter which party affiliation they have. I think that Congress and the politicians really need to understand that this is an issue that reaches far beyond Bristol Bay and affects people, many people, in a whole variety of ways. So it's certainly an issue for the people in the region, but even if, there's a lot of stakeholders out there that don't live in the region, and their representatives need to know that it's important to them. So yeah, and I would just echo what Kat and Lindsay said, go to the websites, be informed. The best thing that, and also donate, for those of us who are kind of the boots on the ground in this, we've hired and commissioned a lot of studies. We've hired experts. We have a lot of legal expertise that's always tracking this issue. So there's a lot of costs that go with it. But what you can do is make your voice heard, and take 5, 10, 15 minutes to say your piece to your elected officials. That would really help us out while we continue to do, diving into the details, making sure that all the subject matter experts that we can have access to are looking into this. And I guess if you can support funding to do so, because that's only going to help if we come to a point in this where we need to have the evidence to make our case and show what we know to be true. So it's kind of how I'll see it fitting together. But for everybody else out there that maybe isn't working on this or tracking on it every day, please make your voice heard.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone. So just for anyone who's watching this on the National Fisherman website, if it's live on the page there, we will be adding links to Alaska's representatives, but also a link to search for your own representatives, your federal representatives. And also the links for UTBB, BBRSDA, and Commercial Fishermen for Bristol Bay are all live on that page right now. So you can click right through to them under resources. And also under resources is a piece that I wrote earlier this month about sort of getting us up to speed on where we are, how we came through the year in this fight, in this journey with the Pebble Mine. And also, I just want to throw out there that donations to nonprofits are tax deductible. And if you get it in by the end of the year, you will be able to deduct it in next year with your 2020 tax returns. So lastly, I'm going to go around. We're getting close to our 1 hour mark. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. I really appreciate you taking the time out to be on this panel today and get this information out there. It's really important to get an update like this, and really valuable to hear it directly from the boots on the ground. And so I just want to go around to each of you and give you a minute for last thoughts, closing thoughts.
I think I'll start off because I want to make sure that Lindsay and Kat kind of have the final word. But I'll just say BBRC is a little bit different, and that our mission is really to try to create as valuable a fishery and as productive a fishery as we can have. Stopping Pebble is not our reason for being necessarily, but it has a huge effect on our reason for being. Because again, if we've created a brand, this fishery has really evolved, and even though the ex-vessel price wasn't so great this year, we're seeing retail prices for sockeye that are probably higher than they've ever been. There's a lot of demand and a lot of respect for Bristol Bay sockeye, as a food product. And you know, it's hard to imagine how we could hold on to that if we had a massive open pit mine upriver from us. And not to mention this fishery, the reason that it's talked about so much outside of Bristol Bay and outside of Alaska is because of its size, its productivity. And a lot of that has to do with just how much pristine habitat there is. And so, you know, if we lose this fight with Pebble, you're talking about really harming our market perception, as well as the thing that makes this fishery so amazing, which is potentially its volume, probably likely its volume, because where else in the world do we have abundant salmon runs and large open pit mining? We don't see that if we look around. So, you know, we firmly believe this is a huge part of our mission in stopping this long-term threat so that we can meet our broader mission of making this a valuable fishery for all those involved.
I can jump in. I'm going to say the thing I think I say at every single panel or presentation we do is just a huge thank you to everyone who's taken the time to tune in today and to follow this issue. And I know that sounds like a broken record, but I don't think I can mean it more than I do right now. This past year, like so many of us who have been fighting this mine for so long, also participate in the commercial fishery or the subsistence fishery, and really summer, going into this past summer was pretty difficult because right leading up to summer, we were looking at the potential for a Pebble receiving their permit, or I mean, the timeline then looked like they may receive their permit potentially while we were all out fishing. And just the fact that so many people kept the drumbeat going and have pushed so hard for this, there is no way the 8,000 population of Bristol Bay, 8,000 people in Bristol Bay, or even 12,000 commercial fishermen could ever have prevented a mine being in place right now. I think about 15, 16 years ago, Pebble set out to break dirt in the next 2 years. I mean, when they started holding their meetings, their plans really were to start mining production by 2008, 2006, 2008, something like that. And the fact that we don't have a mine in the ground right now, Pebble does not have their permit right now, is just thanks to so many people going beyond just hearing about the issue, but really taking action. And when we ask you to take actions, the fact that you do, it's none of this has happened by accident. So it's just truly thank you to everybody who's continued to fight this mine.
Yeah, they both summarized it so well. I can keep mine really short, but same thing. I firmly believe that there would be a mine in the ground, that there would be a hole in the ground right now, if not for the people watching this and everyone that they've reached out to and the folks who just have provided years of support. There's no doubt that we still have a long way to go, and like I said, we're not going to stop until we get there, until we secure those permanent protections. But it's truly a unified effort here. I mean, as one of our talking points, right, is that we see the subsistence, the commercial, the sport, hunters, anglers, tourists, all of those groups have come together to fight this project, which is almost unheard of in a situation like this. So the fact that we can be a part of it is wonderful, and we are just, again, so grateful for Jess, for you, and for this platform to continue to spread this message in this crazy, weird COVID time, and to find a way to make that work is incredible. So Quiana, thank you, to everybody watching. Please do not forget to check out all of our websites online, see what you can do to further engage. We're getting up near the end of the year, so make those donations if you can. And don't forget to check out all of our social too, because we have a lot of activity going on there. And stay tuned in the next couple months as we get closer and closer to the end of the year and what comes next. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. I hope to see you in the happy hour later. And thanks for everyone watching. Again, our resources will be available on nationalfisherman.com, and we hope to hear from you soon.